Zergs all around the world are frustrated. I know that there is a negative sentiment towards the current game state from a lot of Zerg pro gamers, but that is not what I want to talk to you about today. Today I will go over what the Zergs below the pro level and specifically below Grandmaster are experiencing. I've seen countless comments, posts, and messages about how awful their experience currently is. Messages like, they ruined the game by balancing after a single player, or they patched one race out of the game. Zerg is gutted, you can't win with this race anymore unless your name is Cyril. You have to play twice as good as your opponent to win a game. Zerg is so boring to play, you can't do anything fun or aggressive. I've lost 500 MMR since the patch as Zerg. Comments like these are sadly rather common these days, so I tried to figure out why this exactly happened. And what I did in order to do this is I've talked with a Zerg player that has made such a post on Reddit voicing his concerns, and I tried to help him, but more on that later. First, how did we get here and what happened for them to reach these conclusions? Are these people being overly dramatic, or is there something to their claims? What can and maybe should be done to help with the situation? These are the questions I will try to answer in this video. So in order to understand how this all happened, I opened up every single patch since the Balance Council was made, and every single patch that was directed by the Balance Council. And I'll go over all the changes and see how they affected the Zerg, and then the Zerg versus Protoss and the Zerg versus Terran matchup overall. So I think this was the change where they did end up nerfing the Super Broken Nidus, but they also gave the Void Race a triple buff. This was the last patch. This was this was the very last patch that they left us with, and it ended up with a Void Ray carrier meta that was yeah, something else. Either way. After that, for two years, there wasn't really a patch. So the first next big versus change was at patch 5.0.9. So we'll take a look at this now. So what ended up being changed was that queen walks without any form of creep were basically removed from the game. So you now would have to make a lair one way or another if you want to queen walk. This made it so Protoss now has more build order variety, because it was very difficult for Protoss to get away with any form of opening against that queen walk that wasn't the Void Race, and likewise the Void Race were nerfed. And those were the biggest changes. The Lurker also got nerfed. Then the next patch was where the Vipers were nerfed slightly, the Ultras were buffed a little bit, the Hydras were buffed a little bit, the Broodlords were overall, the strength of the Broodlord was nerfed a bit, but they were made a bit quicker, and Ravager all-ins especially were nerfed. I know people complained about this back then. I think it was Pig and Showtime specifically that complained about, or that I remember at least complaining about this. But realistically, we don't really need this build time to be that quickly defensively, but for all our offensive strategies, it does make quite a difference, because now our Ravagers, if we play Pool First Roach, for example, against Terran, they arrive, well, 3.5 seconds too late, which does change and matter quite a bit. The next patch was the biggest one. Here, for Zerg, once again, the Lurkers were nerfed. The Infestor strength was nerfed. The Broodlord was made faster, but the Broodlings were further nerfed. And then the Ultralisk was buffed. The Hydra, I mean, this is most of the positive changes were upgrade timing changes, or upgrades being removed, or some small stuff like that. But then the biggest one is the Banelings were nerfed. First, the +2 doesn't one-shot probes anymore. It also now deals less damage. I mean, just it's flat damage nerf against light units. So against any form of Terran units, this will also matter. And then also they removed the health bonus from the Banelings, which now means that Banelings, if for example a Terran has +1 or is 1 upgrade up on the Banelings, they require 1 less shot to kill. And those were the main changes. So the Baneling was nerfed, the Lurker was nerfed, and the Broodlord was nerfed. And the Infestor was nerfed. So basically everything besides the Ultra from our AoE units was in fact nerfed. And then the next patch, which was that the final Burrow, the Burrow and Infestors were nerfed, because we started playing Burrow and Infestor every time against Terran, and they couldn't react in time, so that was nerfed, but not much else. And now the most recent change, where these should be looked at together, because the Queens now cost 25 more, but the Hatcheries cost 25 less. This is an obvious nerf overall. But then also the Spores were significantly buffed. Like, Spores are insane right now. So Queens were nerfed, Hatcheries were buffed theoretically, and Spore Crawlers were buffed. But then in terms of actual units, the Ultras were changed. They're now a little bit worse, mostly because the model size was reverted, but they also now push the units away, so it doesn't really matter. And then their move speed bonus got reduced a little bit, so It's a slight nerf, I would say. And then the microbial shred got buffed. And the Hydras before Hive upgrades are now worse, and the Hydras after the Hive upgrades are better, but only very slightly. So barely any changes at all. I think the only big patch was this one. In general, almost all of our units did get nerfed, aside from the Hydra. And the Ultralisk, I think, is also better than it initially began with, but the Infestor got a little bit weaker in terms of the fungal and also the Unburrow fungal, which we didn't really abuse before that. Before this time frame, we didn't really abuse it that much. The Viper was nerfed a little bit, the Broodlords were nerfed, and the Lurkers were nerfed. Those two, like Broodlord, Lurker, Baneling, were pretty big nerfs. So the Zergs, in general, they were nerfed. A little bit also Revelry timing attacks were nerfed. And then if we take a look at what got changed from the other races, we will see that Void Rays got nerfed. For the lower level especially, Carriers were nerfed massively because they... the interceptor attack target priority was reduced from 20 to 19. This means that if you fly on top of the carriers, the corruptors don't shoot at interceptors anymore. Before this patch, you couldn't aim move at all against carriers. You would just get completely stomped. So this change ended up mattering a lot for the lower levels. Overall, the biggest changes for Protoss was that the Disruptor got nerfed multiple times, which was kind of a shit unit to begin with against Zerg. And aside from that, obviously their battery overcharge got removed, and now they have the energy recharge, which is quite impactful. And then for the high level, especially the Tempest got buffed, and also the Mothership was buffed for any level. So that is the give and take. And then for Terran, bio remained pretty much completely intact. The early game bio ghosts were nerfed multiple times. I think Liberators were nerfed slightly. Cyclones were buffed. They were changed back and forth, but overall they were buffed in this time frame. So to summarize and give you a quick plus minus on both non-mirrors, I believe against Terran, it is undoubtedly harder to stay alive in general, while late game feels somewhat similar, possibly a bit better for Zerg even. I believe Mech on the lower level got a bit better as well, since they don't really make Ghost anyways. Against Protoss on the high level, early game generally became more easy to play, while Baneling based playstyles and thus also Muta became a lot worse. Lurker styles and late game in general also got worse. But for lower level play, late game actually became considerably better for Zerg, simply because of the interceptor change and the Void Ray nerf. Zerg overall got the short end of the stick throughout these patches, and I think the Baneling patch in particular was rough for us, while the others were mostly fine. Keep in mind that every race did end up getting nerfed overall, but Zerg did get nerfed the most. If the balance of the game changed positively or negatively depends on whether or not you believe that Zerg was too strong before this entire patch cycle. Well, now that you're up to date with what exactly changed, let's come back to the current situation. We've had a patch after EWC, and ever since we've had a still stand on premier level Starcraft 2 competition. After this patch, we mostly have online tournaments that are being dominated by Mech Specs, Glam, and Hero with little to no Zerg participation. As all of this unfolded, the community changed course from drastically whining about Protoss being underpowered to now speaking about Zerg being underpowered. One big change that happened here is that the community doesn't only talk about the pro level, but now massively complains about Zerg being too weak at the lower levels. Here I picked out one of many Reddit posts to show you some of the current frustrations. So this is the Reddit thread that I've talked about. This was from Bongo Dongo Bongo. The reason I'm having it in incognito mode is because I don't go to Reddit StarCraft. In fact, I have it blocked on my normal Chrome. That's why I need this. And the reason I message him is because it's the only one I saw, but I know there's more. Even just here, the first thing that is suggested to me is Zerg has been the lagging race in GM for the last 5 years. So that is why I wanted to figure out how these people come to their conclusions. And I'll just go over the thread real quick, tell you what I think about it, about every single point that he makes, and then I've actually had a very fruitful discussion with him, or not really discussion, we just had a talk, a friendly talk, and he was very reflecting. And what I did was I offered him a free month of my Zerg Academy, so I gave him the money, I PayPal'd him the money so he can pay for my Patreon, and then I wanted to see if his mood about the game changes and if he maybe gets more fun. But without taking too much further away, before I even go into this, let's go into the post. He said, "This is a rant. I'm Diamond 2. I'm aware that I'm not very good at the game, but also not the worst. I've been a Zerg main since I've started, but for the first time, I'm seriously considering switching races. ZVT and ZVP just feels harder than ever. From the second the game starts, I'm on the back foot. ZVP, have fun either getting cheesed for the 3rd time in a row or suffering due to air pressure because I can't have as many queens now, which I'm not the best at utilizing because I'm Diamond 2. ZVT, Okay, let me scout for the 20 possible openings he could be doing and practice every single response until I can counter all of them. Whoops, he did the 21st opening and I'm not equipped to handle it because I'm Diamond 2. The majority of games feel like if I don't have the perfect response to whatever my opponent decides to do, it's over. I know Zerg is the reactive race of the three, but I just can't help but feel I need to put in 3 times the mental effort in everything that a Terran or Protoss does. And I can't do that all the time because I'm not Cyril and I'm Diamond fucking 2. Yes, I'm aware I'm bad, and yes, I'm aware that at the top level, see Cyril and Dark, that Zerg does just fine. But I don't play SC2 because I want to be at the top one day. I play it because I like to play Zerg, and right now it's really hard to play Zerg. This was upvoted 200 times, and we've had the comments agree with him as well. As a Zerg main, that got your exact feeling. I decided to off-race some with how frustrating it is to play Protoss, and then now my Terran and Protoss is now officially both higher MMR than my Zerg. This patch is just bad. I've lost 450 MMR as Zerg in Masters this patch. 3.9k players have no problem A-moving Mech or Skytoss wins versus me because their units require no micro or skill to use. I was almost 5k last patch. Like, what the hell? Now I have 15% win rate and 30% versus Protoss. There's no way anyone can call this balanced. So the main issue that these people seem to have was with the most recent patch. Specifically the most recent patch. So I want to go over this real quick. His first point is that Zergs are getting cheesed quite a lot. And I think this is true. This also goes for every race. I know my girlfriend is Diamond 1, and I sometimes watch her while leathering, and sometimes I give her some tips during the games, and she gets cheesed roughly 60% of the games, I would say, and maybe that's even lowballing it. There's a ton of cheese, and that's Europe ladder. I'd imagine on NA it's even a little bit worse. That is just the way the game works, because with the higher you get, and Diamond's already relatively high, the more cheese you'll encounter, I believe, because the cheesy players will rank up, because cheese is super easy to play. With any race, you can cheese up until Grandmaster without too much skill. So yeah, I think this is a natural observation at around Diamond level. I think cheeses really start to kick into the next gear. This doesn't only go for Zerg, but yes. So then, here, his first point about ZVP is that he's suffering due to air pressure because I can't have as many queens now. This is true. The queens have become more expensive. So let's say we open up with a normal 3-hatch setup and then we start making queens. The moment we make more than 2 queens on 3 hatcheries, we pay extra. But you don't need as many queens anymore because spores are giga busted against air units. It is way, way, way easier now than before the patch to hold any form of sky pressure, because you don't even need the queens to be in position. Beforehand, your queens need to be in position. They could pretty much ignore a spore, dive your mineral line, and kill workers. Now that's impossible. It's way, way, way easier to defend sky units now after the patch than it is before the patch, okay? So this is the first point. Then, ZVT, he says it's difficult because you need to scout so many different openings and you need to practice a response against all the different types of openings. It is true that Terran can pretty much do whatever they want. Like literally, they can make any unit and it's an opener. They can open Viking, Raven, Liberator, Banshee, Battlecruiser. They can open 2-1-1, 3 racks. They can open Hellion drop. It really doesn't matter. They can open however they want. They can open multiple factories, right? They have a huge variety of builds. But you don't need to practice a specific response against everything that Terran does. In fact, ZVT, you can play completely brainless on the Zerg side. If you have a correct build order, you don't even need to scout at all. I don't scout most of the time, and I'm playing against top level players. Obviously, I know what can happen and what can't, but if you just know the general practice of how you open against Terran, you are safe against everything without scouting, with absolute minimal scouting. You don't even need an overlord on the other side of the map. If you want, you can have all your overlords. You can scout if they have a natural, maybe that would be good around that level, so it's not a proxy forex, but after that, you don't need any further scouting. So this point is completely wrong. CVT is actually the easiest matchup, early game-wise, if you understand it correctly. Not from a Grandmaster level perspective, but literally just, okay, I always make this many queens, and then I make this amount of Zerglings, and then I make just drones. Because it is a blanket response that holds everything. It doesn't matter. Hellbats, battlecruisers, mech openings, bio openings. There's a blanket response that you can do against everything. No matter if you want to play Roach or Lingbane, both work against every single opener that Terran has. So this is not entirely true. But how could he know that? That's a different question. That's especially reading this, I wanted to give him the Patreon subscription right away. That's I think what sparked the idea, because I have a video in my Patreon telling how to play against Terran without scouting before I even invited him to to the Patreon, which would have just fit perfectly. Okay, then the next one is that it feels like you have to put in more mental effort because you have to play reactive and you need to counter everything perfectly. Now, you can actually decide to play aggressive as well as Zerg. On a top level, it is true that Zerg's lacking aggressive options. I think this is a real issue that should be talked about. This does not hold true for Diamond. At a Diamond level, it's probably even easier to play something weird and aggressive with Zerg to get your wins. It is not weak at all. The opponents need to still react appropriately to hold any form of all-in or even pressure builds. You can open with a weird pressure. For example, one of the builds that I gave in my Zerg Academy, one of the very first ones, was to simply open with pool first against Protoss. And I know some of my students or patrons or whatever you want to call them, they do open pool first, and every single time I check a replay, they're just straight up ahead because their opponent doesn't know what to do. Just to pool first with 2 links. Not even anything too aggressive. You can also open with gas pool hatch, and they will over defend, they will do whatever. Knowing the correct response is always harder to play reactive in StarCraft. It's always easier to be the aggressor, but you can actually be aggressive. You have the luxury below the absolute top level to do whatever you want. You can make up your own stuff if you want. There's a possibility that it won't be that strong because you don't really understand what makes something strong and what makes something weak. But if you follow the normal mechanics and you understand the way Zerg works in terms of macro, even if you do something weird, you're going to be very successful. You can be the one that has the momentum on his side, and you can be the one where it's harder for the other races to play. In terms of the mental effort, also in general, you don't have to be serial to play Zerg. You can play Zerg in a very simple way, no matter if aggressive or defensive, by just learning proper openings. And I thought that was also one thing that was lacking. So what I then went ahead and messaged him and asked him why he exactly feels like that, and I suggested the idea of giving him that stuff for free, the 1 month of Zerg Academy, and this was his first response. So let's read through it. He was very reflective, and he was honestly great to talk to, a great person. I was actually lucky. I kind of, in hindsight, wished I talked with this guy because I now checked this guy's profile and I wanted to see if I could also convince him. But either way, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Just real quick before I go into his response, I just want to show you guys the last patch because every single whining post has started from this patch. And that is just straight up crazy to me because most of the whining posts are specifically about Protoss as well, because that is what most pro Zerg players are complaining about, mostly. And if you look at it, Zerg didn't really get changed that much, right? The Queen cost 25 more, the Hatchery cost 25 less, so this is an overall nerf, but the Spore Core got way buffed, so you can now just make 1 less Queen, and that's still cheaper than it was before, and you're still safe. Like, this is an overall buff against Protoss, against all the normal openings. Likewise, they got the energy recharge instead of the battery overcharge, which at the low level is a nerf for Protoss. I'm talking low level is anything Masters and below. And yeah, these changes are all like whatever, we can ignore them. This was a nerf, this was a nerf, this was a buff, this was a buff. But these units, they don't matter as much. Like, I would argue that an Immortal and a Disruptor matters more at a Diamond level than a Tempest. And that the Mothership, the biggest change is that it's not abductable, which I still think is an awful change. The biggest change is that it's not abductable, but that is that doesn't really matter. I don't think you should even make a Viper if you're in Diamond for abducting the Mothership. I think you can make 1 Viper and throw a parasitic bomb, but trying to abduct units one at a time I don't think is quite necessary. And overall, I don't understand how this is supposed to make Zerg so weak. Even Terran didn't get any positive buffs where you would think that that it's now all of a sudden crazy weak to Terran because Ghosts now cost 1 extra supply. The Cyclone got reverted, so they can't just make Reactor Cyclone anymore if they scout you doing any Roach pressure, so it's actually good for aggressive variety for Zerg. Other than that, the Planetary got nerfed, the Sensor Tower got nerfed. I don't understand how Zergs think that this patch was so bad for them. So that is one of the big reasons, because I was just logically, in my mind, if I'm a Diamond Zerg player, this patch is actually good for me against Protoss. Against Terran, I think on average it is slightly bad, simply because the Queens cost 25 more minerals, especially if you don't like to play Roaches. I think I can see it feeling worse, and also being a bit worse, because it's harder to stay alive. But what everybody is whining about is Protoss. And this patch hasn't even at like low Grandmaster, high Masters level, this I think is better now for Zerg than it was before. So that's why I specifically wanted to message the gentleman as well, because it makes absolutely no sense to me why all of these people are saying it's because of the patch that they're struggling so much. So either way, let's get into his response now. And it was a very reflected response from him. I talked about him, and I talked to him about giving him the month for free, and I asked him where I think where his frustrations are coming from and why he thinks specifically the patch made him feel that way. And I think he made a lot of good points. So I want to go over the entire response because I thought it is an awesome starting point for my journey into the mind of the Reddit Diamond Zerg players. So he said, "Hey Lambo, thanks for reaching out. Just woke up and checked your stream. I happened to catch you talking about my post. Glad to know I wasn't being scammed. First of all, I'm pleased to see that I wasn't just screaming into the void with my post, which, let's be honest, I was probably tilted and doing exactly that. I thought about it a little more after the fact and thought of a few reasons as to why Zerg feels more frustrating right now. Because this is a very recent trend, right? I already had a good idea as to why this happened, and I talked about it in the stream, and sadly he caught that, which might now influence his response a little bit. But that was just a guess. I think there's many factors that play into this that I will go over after I read this. Either way. First, the recent patch. I think many Zerg players, myself included, felt burned by the patch. Between the Queen nerf, Brood Lord being neglected, Terran getting token nerfs at best, which this is true for the Diamond level, but at a top level, Ghost being 3 supply instead of 2 is not a token nerf, guys. It's not a token nerf. I think straight up, with all the Zerg late game nerfs, and just the Ghost nerfs, it's a net positive for Zerg in late game. Like legit, Ghost was that good. Either way, Hydra is getting an ability that quite frankly most players cannot utilize effectively, which is fair. Between all of these things, even if the balance did not change much at a lower level, it is very easy to look at the patch, identify a problem, and blame it on the patch instead of myself. I think this goes for what a lot of Starcraft players are doing, and this is the mentality of, because we don't have anyone else to blame, has to be then the balance. This is already, I've observed this with pro gamers from way back in the day. Everybody was blaming David Kim instead of themselves. And honestly, these patches are not perfect. Far from it, actually. And I will make an entire extra video, I think, going over all the things that I hated about the Balance Council patches. But I have to defend them at some points, because the response right now from the Zerg players is simply ridiculous. About the last patch in particular. It is simply ridiculous in some parts. That's why I'm making this video right here. Either way, I'm guilty of it. Most likely everybody is guilty of it eventually. This is true. I've also definitely blamed other things more than I should have blamed myself. While the actual balance might not have changed that much at lower levels, which I believe is true, as I said previously. If anything, it made it better against Protoss. In fact, I think it's the best it has been in a long time against Protoss. That mental block is very much real, and that real mental block affects games. Also very, very true what he's saying here. Now, is this a global phenomenon or just a lower rank problem? I don't know. Second reason as to why Zerg might feel worse now is something you brought up during the stream, and that's the pro scene. For the pros, the balance has changed, which is true, and Zerg is weaker than the other two races. This is hard to say objectively, but I get where he's coming from. The SC2 community, for better or worse, massively puts the pro scene on a pedestal when it comes to balance. Everybody knows that Protoss can't win tournaments, but Protoss has been pretty strong on the ladder for a long time. And because of it, the general consensus from the community is that Protoss has always been on the weaker side. There is a disconnect between the community and the balance of the game. I also think that was completely overblown. The amount of, like, everybody, it was completely in that Protoss was weak just because they performed poorly in the big offline tournaments. It was super in, like, all the casters went in on it, besides Rotti maybe. Like, Pig made a video about Protoss getting gutted. I saw Loco, Winter, I saw tweets from other casters. Protoss wasn't that weak. And the last patch, I will say it again, I said it during the patch, I've said it during the other videos about Protoss. The last patch hasn't buffed Protoss that much. Protoss was already good. Like, it's crazy to me that people think that the last patch made Protoss that strong. Against the last patch, for anybody besides Cyril, is honestly even for me, it's not even that bad against Protoss. I can't beat really bad players in late game now, but I couldn't already beat bad players in comparison to myself, obviously, in late game, so it doesn't really matter. If I'm playing a tournament, I'm not playing for late game anyways, and it's now easier to kill them than it was before because I now have a better early game most of the time. So ZVP is actually easier to play even for me. It is an actual nerf for Cyril, and I think late game is a little bit tilted towards one side. But yeah, I don't think the last patch is what made Protoss strong. I think they were already good. I think that was a disconnect between, because everybody just took the offline events, literal top 4 or top 8, and then they picked that one to win. And now obviously what all the Zerg players are doing is they're picking Grandmaster population to win. Or open cap participation, which is also, I mean, everybody's just picking their own cherries. It's pretty crazy. However, nowadays is having a hard time. Nowadays, Zerg is having a hard time in pro leagues, and as you mentioned before, Zerg has always been the most frustrating race to play. I personally do think this is true, and that's also why I said it. Is that as a Zerg, you're kind of the bitch race very often, especially if you try to play Cyril-like, where you try to play reactive and you try to play correctly, because the other players have the momentum on their side, especially at a high level. This is true where Zerg doesn't really have real pressure builds. We can either all in, and then most of the time we need to try and blind counter a specific opening if you want to all in, or we play macro and then we have to take it and we try to not lose too many workers, which obviously is annoying to play. I would always rather be the guy that's flying in with the Orcus trying to deal damage than the guy trying to always defend perfectly, because you don't get a kick out of like not losing workers, but you do out of killing workers. And then whenever you do slip up, you have the potential to straight up lose the game, which makes it frustrating. Likewise, if you don't look at a Hylian run by and you lose 20 workers to Hylians, that is frustrating, but that was always in the game, and that was always part of the game. That's the asymmetric balance that you can't really change that easily. Either way, suddenly the disconnect between the community and the balance of the game has been removed. Players my level can feel this frustration that comes from playing Zerg while also looking at the Pro League and seeing the same thing. So basically what he's saying is that at a lower level it always was frustrating, and beforehand it was always Zerg winning, but now that Zerg's seeming to be performing very poorly at the pro level, it's now you can say, hey, see, these frustrations were right all along. On the surface, everything lines up. Zerg must be objectively weak right now, right? In reality, I'm aware that my own skill level is the deciding factor in whether I win or not, but that mental block is stronger than ever. I think eventually, given time, the Zerg player base will adapt to it. I hope that this happens, but I'm not sure it will by itself, and that's also part of why I'm making this video. So, even though I don't think the last patch made ZVP worse than it was before, in fact, I think it made it better, I saw all of these Zergs commenting on the matchup being terrible. And my general logical conclusion from just reading the patch and thinking about how it should play out tells me that it should be slightly harder against Terran and slightly better against Protoss, if anything. But nothing too game-breaking for the levels below Grandmaster. So what I did was I took a look at the SC2 Pulse win rates, which you can filter by servers and by leagues in the different seasons. Sadly, I can't go too much prior. I would have loved to see the statistics for back in the day, from even before the balance council came into play, but the first season that actually does work is this one. So what I will show you guys now is levels below Grandmaster. We go through Master League, Diamond League, Platinum League, and if you want Gold League as well, for the win rates for Zerg. Okay? I will first show you the Masters League. This is the old patch from before. This is July from last year, so around EWC. You can see here, ZVP was in favor of Protoss. This is from the Zerg POV, so 48.9% win rate against Protoss. TVZ, slightly in favor of Terran. And now if we take a look at this, which is this month, TVZ has gotten 2% better for Terran, but it's now Zerg favored. It has gotten better for Zerg. Okay? And if we do the exact same thing, now let's take a look at Diamond. Diamond 1, Diamond 2, Diamond 3. We can see right now it's actually Zerg favored. These will always be closer to 50% because you get ranked against players at your level, but your matchups are not exactly the same. Let's say Zerg is a bit worse at your level against Terran, then your TVZ might be negative while your PVZ might be positive. Likewise, there's some people that are just shit at ZVZ, and that will obviously affect it as well, but or people that even leave their mirror matchups, which please don't do that because then you're practically smurfing. Either way, we can see here at Diamond, right now it is in favor of Zerg, and if we go back from before the patch, it was over a percent point worse against Protoss as well. It has gotten so the matchup has gotten worse against Terran and better against Protoss. And now we can compare this with Platinum as well. You can do this as well to double check if I'm doing any mistakes. You can go on this website, go to stats, and then filter here with the matchup. So in Platinum it was 51.2% in ZVP. And nowadays it is 52.8, so that's gotten better here as well. These are the overall win rates. And this is even though this map pool is better for Protoss. This map pool is better because the old maps are all good for Protoss. King's Cove, I mean, these maps are just hard to kill Protoss on, and usually you want to kill Protoss. So this is on a better map pool for Protoss. Our win rate now is better. Our win rate against Protoss has consistently gotten better, while our win rate against Terran has consistently gotten worse. I think this is even true for Gold League, if we can check. So these are the win rates right now. We're at 52.7. And let's take a look at the win rates here, where we are at 52.3. Gold League it stayed the most similar. That was probably a little bit to be expected. So if my initial intuition tells me that the race shouldn't be that much worse, and the statistics also don't really show it. I can show you guys Grandmaster, by the way, in comparison, because if you're this video is about the lower levels, it's not about Grandmaster. Like this was Grandmaster, sadly season 2 doesn't work, but this was Grandmaster previously, right? PVT 51, TVZ 52, ZVP 47. And now this is Grandmaster now. TVZ actually in favor of Zerg now, because as I said previously, I think this patch was actually good for Zerg against Terran in the late game. PVT, way better for Protoss. This is mostly a map thing, I think. This is crazy. And ZVP 46.7. So very Protoss favored, especially PVT, but also ZVP. And TVZ has actually gotten better for Zerg. This is just for Grandmaster. This is not what this video is about, though. This video is about all the different comments from Diamond League players, Master League players, Platinum League players telling me that ZVP has gotten so much worse because the patch was so awful. So if it logically makes no sense to me, and the statistics also don't show it, why exactly do all the Zergs feel that way? Because it is obviously not only a single Zerg feeling that way, but it's many. It's a lot of people that are upvoting it, and it's a general consensus among the Zerg community. So now I want to tell you guys a couple of reasons that I think factor into this phenomenon. So let's get into the reasons for why Zergs are complaining so much right now after the patch, even though it didn't affect them as negatively as you might think if you browse Reddit every once in a while. I think the biggest reason is that pro gamers are being unhappy. And if you are a Diamond or a Platinum or a Gold League or a Master League player, it doesn't really matter. But as Jabberdankus said so wisely, I think you feel confirmed in your own frustrations that you have with your game, because they seem to be frustrated as well, right? If you watch my stream, I already try to be not too frustrated, and I am afraid, honestly, to voice my opinions, because I already know these guys that comment on these Reddit threads, they're feeding from this. Even though what they are complaining about is like factually untrue. A lot of the things they're complaining about. There's also people that are just copying our opinions in the completely wrong way. There's people saying Skytos is broken at a high level. It is not. It is not even like the thing that is strong at a high level is completely useless at a low level. They play Blink into Storm into Tempest Mothership Ground. You know that is not actually feasible for a Master League player to do, right? You realize that Charged Icon Immortal is way better than Blink Stalker openers at a Diamond level. It's a joke that you compare our struggles, which I will also go over in another video, I believe. But this is not the video where I do want to go over what actual Grandmaster issues are with Zerg. But if you compare these with the issues at diamond level. Yet it is very easy to hear someone go on about Zerg being weak or maybe Protoss being easy, and then you just say, oh, you know what? Protoss is too easy. The other guy played way worse than me and I deserve to get this win after your ladder loss. It's so much easier than trying to find your own mistakes. And I think that is a big reason. So the programmers being unhappy and voicing their opinions is a big reason as to why the Zergs now feel confirmed in their own opinions, and basically they feel like they have the credentials now to go hard with those. And then the next one is that pros are underperforming. Zerg pros are just simply not signing up to tournaments. And that is because Zerg is weaker now than it was prior, but also this has some other reasons. For example, Raynor is not really feeling like it anymore. A lot of Zergs just have lost motivation. I think Zerg is not as fun anymore. This is a real issue on top level. And I think this has multiple different reasons, but I can't go into it right now. Otherwise, the video will just be too long. But yeah, Zergs are not signing up because a lot of us also simply are not the type to play these weekly cups, and we don't enjoy the game to that degree where we should play in those always. And then a lot of Zergs are also underperforming right now. So you can see that, and you're like, okay, see, Zerg just sucks. And then from Zerg sucks on a pro level, it's very easy to go to Zerg just generally sucks, because most people already thought that Zerg was weak at the lower levels. Then the next reason is, I believe that the queen change, just it costing 25 more minerals, feels more than it actually does affect your gameplay. Like, you can't tell me that the queen costing 25 more minerals loses you games in Platinum League, but you just feel poor when you start the game. So I can understand that frustrations come from this change in particular, especially until you get used to it. Then the next one is that they have actual statistics to point to. Like I just showed you guys, the Grandmaster statistics have gotten worse for Zerg against Protoss in particular, so it's an easy statistic to show anyone that you try to convince of your argument. So if you have anything that a pro says, let's say Raynor just said that Zerg sucks dick, okay, on Rotti's stream. So you now have a clip, and then you have also a statistic. Now it's a lot easier to go on to Reddit to voice your opinions, no matter how wrong they are, because you just feel like you are in the right in that case. And then the next point is that mech is actually annoying, especially since the Cyclone was bugged right after. And the Cyclone still is bugged, by the way. The lock-on cooldown, instead of being 4.2 seconds, I tested it, it feels slightly less than 3 seconds. Like, I want to say 2.9. So that is stronger than it's even supposed to be. But the Cyclone playstyle requires specific responses. And mech in general is relatively easy to play. And now with a slightly, I guess, easier to transition Cyclone. It's not actually easier to transition. I think it's just a little bit easier to play if you start with it. You will lose against some double-digit APM Terran players that will feel very frustrating, because I think mech is generally strong. I think it's a little bit weaker than it was in 5.0.11 simply because of the Ghost nerf, since usually mech was very strong defensively, and then you could simply go into Ghost and play late game, but that's now worse. But on a lower level, this is not quite the case, and just a simple mech army is really annoying to play against. So this actually being a true factor, as well as the queens costing more, so you struggling a little bit more in the early game against Terran, is another factor. An extra factor that I just realized with Jabberdankus, and that he will talk about a little bit later as well, towards, is that Zergs don't really have content creators that give a lot of free good guides, which I, by the way, will start doing on the Zerg Academy. I specifically will upload guides for Skytos and Mech, so you guys can beat the double-digit APM players. And other than that, I am uploading consistent content on my Zerg Academy with a lot of guides, build order guides, etc., where a lot of Zergs have already improved massively. But a lot of Zergs simply don't play build orders. Everybody thinks that you have to play perfect defensively, but they don't understand the game enough, because I think they're lacking a bit of educational content, to be honest. So I guess this is partly my fault, but I'm not sure if there's even any other Zergs that are doing educational content right now. Either way, a lot of Zergs don't play build orders right now, and they don't really know what to do. So that leads to them thinking that they have to play reactive and have to have a perfect response against everything, which is just simply not true. In most cases, you can do a blanket response and basically cover almost everything that your opponent can do. It's just in a couple of early game interactions where Zerg does have to have a correct reaction, but that goes for every race. Like if you're a Terran, you need to learn how to play against Pool First Roach or Proxy Hatch Roach. Or a proxy gate from the Protoss. So, you know, this type of stuff happens for every race. But Zergs think this is the case right now, even more than it really is the case. And I think then it is also the two general things of Zergs always feeling like a bitch because you are usually the defensive one. And it's also always easier to blame someone else than yourself. And every single race does this. Like if I watch a Hero Marine stream, there's Terrans in there that think the Terran is unplayable, no matter if there was just a TVT finals in Katowice and in GSL. Like it legitimately doesn't matter. I think no matter which race you play, there's always going to be a lot of people that try to point the finger to someone else before thinking and reflecting on their own mistakes. That is just natural in gaming. That's also why whenever I try to play team games, I just play with friends. Otherwise, I join a Dota game and from minute 2, I have 2 Russians flaming each other. Same in a CS game. So I think that is a natural cause, but that has nothing to do specifically with this patch. That just goes to show why a lot of people have these opinions about Zerg. And then the reasons I've named prior to this, I think, are the reason why we see a lot of this right now. And then the last reason, and I think an extra very important one, is that this is now, I'm going to say, socially acceptable. I'm not sure how else to put it, because the Protosses are finally feeling like they're actually fine. So now the Zergs are whining, and they're not going to get the instant counter of, man, how can you whine because Cyril isn't winning everything anymore? So it's now a little bit more socially acceptable, and now there's a lot of circle jerks where Zergs are like, oh my god, we have it so rough right now. And then if you hear that and you see these strats, it obviously will duplicate. You're going to be like, oh yeah, damn. We have the hardest. We have it the hardest right now. It's pretty crazy, honestly. But I think those are the main reasons as to why Zergs are feeling the way they do right now. I don't want to downplay anything here. I just think specifically blaming the last patch is a little bit ridiculous if you think about it. If you actually read through the patch and you put changes against changes, I think it's a bit ridiculous. But there can be effects of the patch. It just is not that you lose 500 MMR, which I've read multiple times already. So if I literally scroll down here, there's already the first post that's saying he lost 450 MMR. This is because of a mental block. Like the mental block can be real. It can be a real thing that you think Zerg sucks. And now you also get more frustrated because after the game you think, man, my race just sucks. My opponent played way worse than me. I have to play 2 times as good as him to win the game. And then you play worse. That's a real thing. And that can be the cause of a patch. There can be, just as Jabberdankus put it so nicely, there can be real mental blocks that will affect your gameplay in a real way. But it's not the fault only of the balance council and of the patch. So if I look at this Reddit commenter here, who was a top 1% commenter, he made a recent Reddit post, which I was very lucky to click because I thought it was hilarious. He said, "Here's David Kim, the best balance designer this game has ever seen." And if I scroll down a little bit more, I see the very first comment, and this one is actually hilarious. He said, "Me when I'm rewriting history, me when I'm in a rewriting history contest, and my opponent is a Starcraft 2 fan." Because I think you guys, like the people that are pretending like the balance was so perfect beforehand, and the game design was so great, and don't get me wrong, I hate a lot of the patches that the Balance Council has done. They're worse for Zerg. No doubts about it, especially on pro level. The patches have been bad for Zerg. And then it goes to whether you think that is fair or not. I don't really care, but I hate a lot of single changes as well that they put in there. I don't like the way it works perfectly from the Balance Council, and there's a lot of criticism that is fair. But people that are just completely deluded as to what exactly happened in the past with the real game designers that did this professionally are pretty crazy. So the same person says, well, to be honest, there isn't much of a bar to reach. Best game designer in this game when it's only been David Kim and this terrible community bandits council, which isn't even true. Like after David Kim left, we've had a couple of years where we had Monk and some other people in the balance department and balancing the game. And with these professional game designers, I also think people, first of all, there's a lot of just misinformation how the balance council works, which it's hard for me to set clear, but people are just making shit up there. And people apparently don't even know when the Balance Council started. The first patch that happened was the patch where we double nerfed the Void Race and removed the Queen Walk. That was the first patch. You know what we had before that? Because I feel like the people in the Starcraft community partially have the memory of a goldfish, or not even a goldfishes. I think there's an insult to the goldfishes. I googled at some point which animals have the worst memories, and I believe it was hippopotamus, the thing that came out. So you guys have the memory of a hippopotamus, if that is what you think. If you guys want us to revert the balance back to how it was before the Balance Council came into play, please be my guest, because Zerg was actually better at the pro level. But you know where it wasn't better? Is below the pro level. In fact, it was fucking shit below the pro level. And the distribution wasn't much better in Grandmaster. Let me tell you, I remember because I played 2 years straight against 2 Stargate Void Ray openers. 2 fucking years straight, because they left us with a triple Void Ray buff. By the way, every second game against Terran was proxy shield battery Void Ray. You guys don't even probably remember that. Like, when I off-race with Terran, I would die the moment I make the slightest mistake against a proxy Void Ray with shield batteries in my natural. Like, I would lose almost every game to that. And the moment I done queue with Zerg, I would get only Protoss players. At some point, I got 28 Protosses, 27 or 28 Protosses in a row. That's almost 30 games straight of just ZVP. And almost all of them were 2 Stargate Void Ray. Because what the great game designers have left us with was a fucking triple Void Ray buff. And you guys don't even remember that. Man, before the triple Void Ray buff, you know what we had? We had the most broken Nidus ever. We had Nidus Swarm Host. That's great for us. Honestly, if you're a Zerg, let us go back to that patch. You know who this isn't great for? For any of the other races, because we had the most insane Nidus ever. Before that, we had in Heart of the Swarm, the worst meta ever, Swarm Host. I remember being in the alternate boot camp together with Hasuop, Soke, Monty back then, so 3 Protoss players, and they were trying their absolute hardest for hours to figure out how to counter Swarm Host, and they couldn't come up with a single thing because there wasn't anything there. It was just broken. They would play an hour game every time to slowly die. It was the worst game design ever. There was also Broodlords. I think there's huge issues with the way that StarCraft design is working out right now, simply because we don't have enough changes. I think most of it is coming from that, and the game is getting pretty figured out. So I would love to see more changes, especially just more changes, wide changes, all of that. It is not possible, apparently, with the way that things are going right now. Probably not just because of the council, but rather because Blizzard isn't actively supporting the game. But if you're pretending like beforehand the game was perfect, you're just lying about what actually happened. The absolute worst period of the game, for me personally, playing it, without it even being imbalanced, was right before the Balance Council came in, and that's 2 years straight of playing against 2 Stargate Void Ray into carrier openings. Skytoss every single game. Zerg, if you're a Diamond player back then, was way, way, way worse than it is right now. It doesn't matter that the Lurker lost 10 HP and it burrows slower and it moves a bit slower. The Broodlord being faster but weaker doesn't fucking matter for you. The fact that you can't double abduct. Bro, get your head out of your fucking ass. I can't believe it, man. Skytoss was way worse back then, and you guys are acting like now all of a sudden you're losing against 50 APM Skytoss players because of the Balance Council. That's fucking crazy to me. Like, I honestly can't believe it. This is completely off script, but it just drives me crazy. I can't believe it. I looked at this, I saw that he was a top 1% commenter, and I see this, and dude, but shout out to David Kim. Like, I like the guy, really. But the real game designers pretending like there was never anything wrong with that is fucking false. We are now at like, what, 10 years of Legacy of the Void? I think Heart of the Swarm and Wings of Liberty ran for 2 years each. And towards the end of Wings of Liberty and towards the end of Heart of the Swarm, the game was stale. Because it started to get figured out. Because the game developers started developing another game. The reason the game feels stale is because there's no updates. No active contribution from Blizzard trying to help out, okay? That is also why I don't think 8 worker start or something like that would help us at all. In fact, back when we had 6 worker start, towards the end of both Wings of Liberty and especially Heart of the Swarm, it ended up just being drone up your mineral lines first because you figure out how to hold everything, since it was way more stale. And now, since we don't have we don't have a patch for as long as basically the entirety of Wings of Liberty or Heart of the Swarm went for. Like, it's crazy to compare these situations. We've been playing this game forever, and we figured it out. Obviously, the game is going to be more stale. And I wish we could do things differently, and the Balance Council do more quick changes just constant patches the entire time, the entire way through. I love we could do it, but this rewriting history shit is just fucking annoying. And I get it that Zerg can suck. Playing Zerg can suck. Playing Zerg for me right now sucks. But it is also very frustrating that every single time I voice my honest opinions about pro level, which I have a really hard time doing right now because you guys are gonna use it to confirm your own biases and then say why Zerg sucks at your level, which it just doesn't. Zerg's not that bad. You're a diamond league. Please learn an opening, okay? Don't fucking blame the Balance Council for you not being able to play an opening. It's crazy. So yeah, in my mind, I know the Balance Council isn't perfect, and I know the old game designers that we've had, and there were a couple, not just David Kim, also weren't perfect, but the people with the worst track record in terms of changes and assessing those changes is actually Reddit. You guys were so far off almost every single patch. You guys were complaining before this patch about how shit Protoss is, and now all of a sudden it's good. Even though the patch barely affected the balance in terms of Protoss. And now all of a sudden Zerg is super shit at every single level. Besides Cyril, it's pretty crazy how confident everybody is in their opinion on this website. So yeah, I sometimes this type of stuff gets me going. But before I go too deep into this, and by the way, if you guys want to see me go over old threads that have aged terribly, I can make a video about that. It's just a new video idea making fun of people that had terrible opinions and were super convinced by him. It doesn't sound like a great video title, but maybe I can think of something there. Either way, let's go into what I think actually could be done in order to make Zergs feel better about the current state and also in order to make the game more enjoyable for them. I think my video is basically trying to accomplish this. So this is the first point for me personally. I made a video for this. And then the second thing I did personally was I opened up my Zerg Academy, which I think will help a lot of Zergs just straight up rise in MMR, but also just straight up understand the game better. And another thing I did with the Zerg Academy is that I started uploading guides against specifically Skytos and Mech, because those are the two most complained about unit compositions. And these guides are free. So usually in order to access all my videos, which so far I've made, I don't know, over 50, I have the Patreon for a little bit less than 2 months, and I uploaded 50 videos overall. And every single video that I uploaded for Skytos specifically, I asked my members if it's fine with them, and they said it is. So I upload all of these for free, and everybody has access to them. This includes game plans against these for now, but it will also include more replay examples of mistakes, etc. So if you guys are struggling with those two, feel free to check out my Zerg Academy, because you can do so for free in the Skytos anti-Skytos guide and in the anti-mech guides. I've made playlists specifically for that. So that's the second step I took. And then specifically for Terran, I think the Cyclone bug should be fixed. I think it's pretty ridiculous that isn't fixed yet, because it just the cooldown on the lock-on is just way too short. And I think mech is much more of an issue actually on lower level than Skytos is. Now I have about 50 patrons I think at this point, and from almost all of them, they tell me that their best matchup is against Protoss and that they don't really struggle that much with Skytos. There are some that it wasn't even that easy for me to get some Skytos replays, because I tried to get as many Skytos replays as possible. I've had some patrons that have helped me out quite a bit, but there weren't actually that many just straight up Skytos replays. Mech replays was a lot easier to get, and these mech replays, I looked at it, and mech actually is hard to beat, even if the Terran player is not that good. But I also want you guys to understand that this type of stuff always happens in StarCraft. The races are not the same, but even Zerg has a lot of stuff that is easier at the lower levels than for the other races. For example, I mean, all-ins in general are always easier than to play properly defensively, and as a Zerg, you can also do all-ins straight to Masters League, check free MMR fighters. You can gain MMR like crazy by just learning all-ins properly. Especially if you pick the right all-ins, they can probably carry you straight to Grandmaster. But in the actual game, in terms of game mechanics, Zerg has one tool at their disposal, which really helps them on the lower levels, and that is that you can make many drones at once. It's a little bit less punishing. in terms of supply blocks as well, because you can make many overlords at once. You bank the larva, and then instead of just having not made those workers, you can make them later on, which really helps. And you also kind of need to punish Zerg at a lower level, because the Terrans and the Protosses, they can't constantly produce workers. That's a big difficulty. Let's say you're in Platinum League or something, or in Gold League, and a Zerg that is not punished and just makes a lot of workers just ends up having way more stuff, like way more stuff, and it's not even close. And even if you have no clue what you're doing, you're gonna win the game. So you can play with less skill in the view of the Terrans and the Protosses as well. Likewise, if they do something aggressive and you seem to fall behind, but then you make 40 workers, on lower level player, after pressure, will not have a strong follow-up to punish you for making all those drones, and very often you can make those drones and all of a sudden you're ahead again by simply making a lot of workers. Another thing where you can very easily win, especially on lower levels, is lurkers. Lurkers are super hard to play against and not that difficult to play. They're not easy to play by any means, but the moment you have them, they're actually quite hard to play against, especially for Terran or Protoss ground, since the counter requires good army movement and specific unit compositions, which are not that easy to play on the side of your opponents. Likewise, you can win a game straight up, even if the other guy didn't mess up too much, by just not paying attention. All of a sudden, a lurker knight shows up. Like, lurkers in general, if you play macro games as a Terran or as a Protoss on a lower level, are pretty annoying to play against and are easier to play with than against. So Zerg also has this stuff, but I understand that Mech and Skytos also are strong candidates for this column of styles where you can play and it's a lot easier than it is to play against it. Likewise, cannon rushes or any form of all-ins, but that goes for all three races. Okay. I've also have cannon rush, anti-cannon rush tutorial on my Patreon, for example. So I'm trying to help with that. I think making toss harder to play would be kind of cool. I don't really think this is necessary for the lower levels too much, if I'm being entirely honest. I do think for the Grandmaster level, it would be kind of nice, because there's a lot of Protosses there. And I do think their race is easier to play and get decent at than the other races. And last time I said this wasn't a hot take, and there were Protoss players that were annoyed by it, but I'm pretty sure you can ask the Protoss players, and even they would agree that it's easier to get to 6k with Protoss than with the other races. So stuff like, why does the High Templar have an auto attack? I have no idea. I kind of wish we could remove that. Or why do the warp gates transform automatically? Stuff that doesn't actually nerf Protoss, but just makes it a little bit harder to play, I think would be cool. If you guys have any ideas, you can post them below. I didn't really think too much about it. But just a thought. I think this would help mostly with Grandmaster, not so much with lower levels. But if this makes us feel happier, the Grandmasters, as I said previously, this will also reflect in the opinions of lower level players. Then in general, I think making more quick changes to not let the meta get this stale would also help. And giving out more buffs instead of nerfs. Every race always feels like the patch is terrible for them, because they see their own changes and they always say, oh, this is so bad for us. And then what the other races got wasn't even that bad of a nerf. I see it every single time any patch releases. Everybody thinks the patch is bad for them. Legit every single time. So I wish we could just give out buffs instead of nerfing stuff that is annoying. Just give out buffs, okay, to every race. Try to give them tools to beat it, and give them something to look forward to. I would love to have as many changes as possible, but just a general change in how we do stuff is, I wish we could give out a little bit more buffs. And then the last thing that would really help, I think, in this situation is if big tournaments finally get announced, because that will get Zerg players to practice. I think the moment also these big tournaments happen, this all will stop or cease pretty much entirely, because then you will see Cyril win, and then Raynor is in the top 8, maybe a Dark is in the top 8, or a Solar or something. And instantly, all of a sudden, Zerg doesn't look that broken anymore. And usually the memory of the Starcraft 2 scene, just like with any sports, by the way, Starcraft is not even that bad in that regard, goes as long as the last big tournament. So the moment those big tournaments get announced, not only will the Zergs be better, because they will have something to practice for, but they will also perform better. I also think making Zerg in general more fun to play, would be a nice objective for the Balance Council. This goes for high-level players, because then they would play more and there will be more Zergs on the ladder, etc. But this also goes for lower level. And as I said previously, this always goes hand in hand, even though the balance isn't the same at high level and at low level. Because, for example, at low level, no one can control the Tempest army properly. in late game, and carriers are much better. But at high level, carriers are awful. I'm happy every single time I see a carrier. Like hell, I actually think carrier is worse than having stalkers in the late game in most scenarios on the high level. But this is not the same for low level. But if we do something that helps the high level players perform better than the low level players, won't look at the tournaments and see 0 Zergs. It's also frustrating, I understand, to watch every single weekly tournament and there's just no Zergs. You always watch Max Pikes against Hero, and then the other semifinal is Clem against Bian or something. And it's pretty much always the same. So if you help out the Zergs in terms of making it more fun, it doesn't even necessarily need to be stronger, but this will make them play more, and then it also leads to more Zerg participation and more Zerg results, or even just big tournaments being announced will lead to more motivation for them to play. And thus will also make these discussions, I think, quiet down a little bit. And last but not least, I checked in with our favorite Redditor, Jabberdankus, to see how his month, his outlook changed after a month in the Zerg Academy. And he mostly said that learning specific build orders helped him a lot, which I didn't even think that you don't have matchup specific build orders as a Zerg player in Diamond, because Diamond is already pretty good. But he said he found that was immediately rewarding, also giving him some MMR, especially in ZVZ, where he practiced a new build. And he said he found the game more enjoyable than when he made his original post, where learning build orders showed him what he was doing wrong, and games became less frustrating because of it. And even though he still thinks Zerg has to put in more effort, sometimes it is not nearly as prevalent anymore as he made it out to be, and these feelings were mostly relegated to cheese builds like BC Rush, 3 Rex, etc. And there were much fewer cases where he thought he's just A moving into me and I can't do anything about it. So this mostly changed with simple knowledge. I can tell you because I asked him how many videos of the 50 he actually watched, because I understand that you can't have infinite time, and I was genuinely curious, and he watched about 6 to 7, and he only watched the build order guides. So not really much else from the Zerg Academy, and even that helped him to understand mistakes in his own gameplay rather than saying, what the other guy does is simply too strong, too easy, all that sort of stuff. I think simply having a proper game plan with a proper build order would help out almost every Zerg massively. I've already seen huge MMI transformations within my Zerg Academy. I've seen someone reach Grandmaster for the first time. I've seen someone reach, I think, just the other day we've had someone reach 5k for the first time. Someone reached Diamond 1 for the first time. So breaking through barriers, and most of it is really just with knowledge, where I think a lot of Zergs, if you actually want to have good results, just mindlessly lettering will not actually get you as much better. If you have 3 hours, let's say every second day you play for 3 hours or something, maybe even less, it doesn't really matter. Instead of playing 3 hours, maybe watching one of those videos for 30 minutes or thinking about the game, reflecting. If you, let's say you don't have access to the Zerg Academy, watch my old videos. You can even find some good info there, or try to copy something from replay of a pro gamer, or use free sources. Like I think on all things, Zerg should also have a Discord with a lot of grandmasters in there that will help you out. I'm sure there is stuff for free as well. If you don't want to go for the Zerg Academy in particular, I completely understand that. I don't want to force anything on you guys there. But even just learning build orders and having a game plan can be a super simple game plan. Will help you out dramatically. And instead of using your 30 minutes to write a Reddit post, trying to learn something new and then implement it into your gameplay, I think would help out a ton. And I can guarantee you that a lot of the players that you play against, these Tyrants and these Protoss players that presumably beat you with less effort, will do some things better than you do. A lot of them will have build orders that they practiced, and a lot of them are not completely freestyling, which I think some Zergs are. And then there are some Zergs that never practice their micro, and there might be Tyrant players that beat you that were on a micro map before. You know, trying to work on yourself, I think, always is better. In that regard, and I really think Zergs right now are lacking a little bit of knowledge, so you can go ahead and check out the Zerg Academy. You can go to the description and check out the Zerg Academy with a link there. I've poured a lot of heart and effort into this project, and if you do want to get better at Zerg, I genuinely don't think there is a single better place to do it than in the Zerg Academy, where we have a super active Discord with Zergs trying to help out each other, where you can constantly ask me questions, send in replays, etc., where you will find help from not only me, but also other Zergs. And on top of that, you will support me. That's the best way of supporting me. Patreon doesn't take a huge cut. You can also see how much money I make from it. It's a great form of income and it motivates me dearly. So if you want to check it out, you can. You can also simply watch the free guides first and see if you like that type of content. And if you don't, that's not an issue either. And in terms of closing thoughts, I thought there was pretty much nothing more fitting than asking Jabberdankus to give you guys some words, since he started out as a frustrated Reddit Zerg himself. And he said, and I quote, "Learn a build order, idiot." And I will leave you guys with my last remarks, which will answer the title of this video, and that is that Zerg is in fact not trash. Please stop being overdramatic, whiny bitches. For my closing thoughts, I asked Jabberdankus to direct some words directly to you guys, since he started out as an angry Reddit Zerg player venting a little bit. And he said, and I quote, "Learn a build order, idiot." And I thought that was very fitting. In terms of my own thoughts, I can fully understand how frustrating Zerg can be. I play Zerg for the past 14 years of my life, and I know how it can feel when you're trying to always have the right response. It can be so overwhelming if there's many things to consider. It is super annoying if you miss a scout on something and then you feel like you die just because of that. But it is not simply as bad as you guys think, and it's definitely not as bad because of the most recent patch. That's just bogus. The biggest thing that changed below Grandmaster is the perception of the community. And I hope that this video will help people understand that and thus be less frustrated. Maybe think a little bit more about what actually went wrong in the games. Think about what you could be doing better. Maybe learn a real build order. Maybe watch a video as to how to counter certain things, because most of the things that you will encounter on the ladder are countered by the same response. If you have a proper build order, if you have a proper early game guide that explains to you how many queens you need and then how many zerglings you need, and then that kind of just defends everything. So even if you want to play reactive, it is always a little bit harder to play reactive and defensive than the aggressor, but it's really not that bad, and specifically the patches haven't made it that bad. This is what I want you guys to take away from this. The last patch didn't make you 500 MMR worse. The Balance Council didn't make the race unplayable, especially if you're in Platinum League or Diamond League. Zerg can always be difficult at any level, but it simply isn't that bad. So please don't be as overdramatic as people are being right now. And I also know this is not everybody that is watching this video. It is probably a minority of people that will watch this, but I feel like if I even just reach a couple of people that were very convinced in their own views and were always blaming something that is else, that is not themselves, then this was a success. And you guys can also let me know in the comments what you think about the video. I am sure I will have a lot of angry comments below, but that is completely fine. And I'm open for any discussion. So thank you guys so much for watching this far. This ended up being a massive podcast episode. And yeah, let me know if you like it. See you guys in the next video, and bye-bye.